That at least 50 civilians were killed and more than 50 wounded in a NATO bombing raid on a village near Prizren in southwest Kosovo. There's been no independent confirmation of the claim, but the alliance did say that last night's bombing was the heaviest yet and that one of the attacks was on Prizren. Our diplomatic correspondent Nicholas Witchell is outside the Ministry of Defence. Nicholas.
Anna, so far no comment from either the Ministry of Defence or indeed from NATO about these claims from the Serbs, which of course, as you were saying, have not been confirmed. The one thing that is known about the air raids, also as you indicated, is that NATO says they were the heaviest raids of the air campaign so far. NATO, of course, now investigating the claims of an attack on this village. One event here in London this morning, a visit by the moderate Kosovo-Albanian leader, Dr. Ibrahim Rugova. He went for a breakfast meeting with the Foreign Secretary.
Dr. Rugova is on a tour of European capitals. The greeting between him and the Foreign Secretary was a warm one, and the message from Mr. Cook was one of determination that NATO would prevail.
I have assured Dr. Rugova of the resolve of our government and of our allies to complete the task to which we set our hand, to reverse that ethnic cleansing of Kosovo so that the people in the refugee camps can return, and so that Dr. Rugova himself can return from exile.
Dr. Rugova agreed that the priority was to get the refugees back to Kosovo, but he said this could only happen when conditions were safe.
For this, it is important that there is an international and NATO presence.
The Russians are still one of the keys to finding a settlement. Despite Mr. Yeltsin's warnings that they might call a halt to their diplomacy, the Americans remain confident that Russian efforts will continue.
While there are some important issues still outstanding that need to be resolved between us and the Russians, there's enough common ground for us to feel and for them to feel that we should continue this process, including in the days to come.
The latest pictures from inside Kosovo show Serb forces patrolling their side of the border. The Yugoslavs are now saying there will be no further withdrawal of their forces until the NATO air attacks stop. NATO still insists the air attacks will continue until Serb forces have left the province.
So clearly, self-evidently, still a very considerable gap between the two sides. The Yugoslavs still absolutely determined that they will not be seen to be the side which gives way first. Also keen, of course, to make the maximum propaganda value out of any mistaken attacks that NATO may have carried out. So those reports, of course, still to be confirmed. And at the same time, NATO equally determined that it will not be the side which gives way or blinks first. Now, from the Ministry of Defence, Anna, back to you.
Nicholas, thank you. Our defence correspondent Mark Leahy is at NATO headquarters in Brussels. Mark, British nuclear forces may have been seriously compromised by the theft of secrets from an American nuclear research laboratory. A senior member of the US Senate Intelligence Committee has told the BBC the technology which has been handed over to China could allow them to detect our submarines.
For Britain, the most worrying aspect of the spy scandals rocking America concerns a Chinese-born physicist called Peter Lee. He was working on a secret American-British project to develop a new type of radar capable of detecting submarines from the air. The two governments have spent 20 years carrying out the research. But in May 1997, Mr. Lee passed on the information to Chinese scientists. A member of the Senate Intelligence Committee said that China could now use this technology to detect British and American nuclear submarines. Britain is particularly vulnerable because the effectiveness of her nuclear deterrence depends on her Trident nuclear submarines remaining undetected. The Chinese have also probably gained information about British nuclear weapons from the so-called legacy codes, secret computer files stored at Los Alamos Nuclear Laboratory, which were downloaded onto an unclassified computer by Wen Ho Lee, another Chinese-American.
Tom Carver, BBC News, Washington.
And here the Ministry of Defence say they will not discuss the operational details of Britain's nuclear deterrent. Our correspondent Peter Hunt has been examining the implications of China learning our technological secrets.
Only recently, the Ministry of Defence was happy to show off to the BBC one of its nuclear-powered submarines, which isn't armed with nuclear weapons. But perhaps not surprisingly, it's more guarded when discussing nuclear secrets. An MOD spokesman has said they don't discuss matters of intelligence. At this morning's daily briefing on the war in the Balkans, Defence Minister John Speller was tackled on the subject.
We're not aware of any unauthorised release of nuclear warhead information of UK origin or of any information which could help others detect our Trident nuclear submarines.
There are 3 Trident nuclear submarines in service. A 4th is undergoing trials and will be in use from next year. With the end of the Cold War, the number of missiles carried on each sub has been reduced to 16. Each missile has a number of nuclear warheads, which can be aimed at separate targets. There are 48 warheads on each submarine. Underwater, they're meant to be undetectable. Defence experts say what's worrying is the possibility that China now knows how to track them by satellite. After the publication of the names of MI6 officers on the internet, one Labour MP has described this as a double blow for intelligence. Peter Hunt, BBC News.
Michael Codner is a former naval officer who specialises in naval warfare, and I asked him whether the theft of this information was very damaging.
In the longer term, this is a very serious matter. In the immediate term, our submarines aren't suddenly at risk, and nor would we expect the Chinese program to cause some major change to the strategic balance. But in the longer term, these things are very serious.
But could the Chinese use this information against our Trident submarines and track them with their present know-how?
We're talking about very much the leading edge of technology here. As I understand, such programs as there are in using radar to detect not the submarine itself, but the effects the submarine may create when it's dived on the surface are pretty tentative and not very mature at this stage. If the Chinese or anyone else has got this information, they still have the problem of turning that information into a program, putting it into an airborne or whatever, a space platform, and then developing the tactics to use this information.
What about the information about the warheads that they've got?
Certainly from our point of view, if one nation suddenly manages to achieve a level of capability a lot higher than it had before, this is obviously destabilizing from our point of view. The Chinese, however, may well argue that equality of capability would be less stabilizing.
Michael Codner, thank you very much for talking to us. A private funeral service is to be held for Jill Dando in